Welcome into another day of your Daily Devo. My name is Pastor Rick, and we are jumping on in to the second part of the first half of John chapter 4. We're in the middle of the account of the woman at the well. There's basically just too much of this story to cover in one video. So we're here in part 2, and I think we'll wrap up the story today. Good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, you know how it is. So we're going to go ahead and jump on in to verse 16. If you remember, yesterday we just talked about how she came to the well, and Jesus was there. That wasn't his destination. It just happened to be kind of on the way, where he was going. And so sometimes God's got a plan for you that doesn't seem obvious, and it doesn't seem maybe even connected to where you're headed. And so we need to make sure that we're not too overly focused on the destination, and maybe even like forsaking or forgetting about the journey, about just the process. God is definitely a God of the process. He is definitely a God over the journey. And not that the destination has nothing to do with him, but I think God's much more concerned about who you are becoming, and a lot less concerned about what you're doing. Like, when it all comes down to it, really, does God need you? No, God doesn't need you. God is fully capable of accomplishing anything he feels like accomplishing. But he's very interested in molding you and shaping you to become more like him. So that was one part we talked about. And then the second part we talked about was when she talked to Jesus about, hey, if you could hook me up with that water that you're talking about, I wouldn't have to draw water anymore. That would really free up a big part of my day, She's like, all right, you could serve my needs. That's great, And that might be a great introductory way to kind of come to the Lord. But we're going to need to grow past that. We're going to need to make sure that that is not the driving force behind our relationship with God. We need to make sure that we get to know him, understand who he is, and worship him for who he is, not because of something that he's done or because he makes your life so much easier. So verse 16, as we jump into today, we now kind of just get that little quick recap of what we covered yesterday. So verse 16, go call your husband, he told her, and come on back here. Verse 17 says, I don't have a husband, she answered. You've correctly said, I don't have a husband, Jesus said. Okay. For you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have is not your husband. What you have said is true. Wow, okay. Jesus just called her right on out. Jesus knows exactly what's going on in her life. Jesus knows exactly what's going on in your life. Have you ever had those people that they're like, oh, I couldn't come into church. I get struck by lightning, like pow, like God would just come and get me because of all the stuff going on in my life. And they somehow like use that as an excuse not to come to the Lord. Well, this kind of knocks that straight on down. God is fully aware of who you are and what you have done and where you come from and your track record and your thought processes. He knows. He doesn't just know what you say and what you've done. He knows what you thought about doing. And that's kind of scary. I mean, if we're all really honest, like we've all thought about doing a whole lot more stuff than what we actually did. But here we're talking about that's a pretty big track record right there. You've had 5 husbands. The man that you're with right now is not your husband. So what you've said is true. Can you think of a story? Can you think of a person? Can you think of a scenario where God's not going to love you? It's a good question to ask because clearly the answer is no. There is no scenario where you somehow like out-sinned the grace of God. Not possible. I love her response. Sir, the woman replied, I see that you are a prophet. Well, what was your first clue, girl? He just read your mail, Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain. She's like changing the subject because that got a little uncomfortable. Jesus, don't be confronting me with my sin. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem. And Jesus told her, believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. So he's kind of like breaking it free. He's breaking it free from location. He's breaking it free from an unnecessary amount of like religious duty and religious rite and tradition and that kind of thing. Like, and he's saying true worshipers are going to worship God in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, who's called the Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus told her, I'm the one speaking to you. The one speaking to you, am he. And Jesus told her, I, the one speaking to you, am he. So here we have her saying, I know that the Messiah, the anointed one who is called the Christ, when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus straight up tells her, I am he. I am the Messiah. So Jesus claimed to be God. He claimed to be the Messiah. So if he's not, we have a much bigger problem on our hands. Because, well, without Jesus living the perfect life, dying on the cross and rising from the dead for our sins, we're without any hope. And also, if he's not the Messiah, then he's a sick, sick liar. Jesus told her, I, the one who is speaking to you, am he. So, remembering that God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. So it's not about getting hung up on your nationality. It's not getting hung up on your lineage. It's not getting hung up on where in the city that you're in or the mountain that you're on. We are talking about worshiping God in spirit, because he is spirit, and in truth. So it's a actual true thing going on in your heart as you're worshiping the Lord. And then he says, I'm the Messiah. So we're going to finish off with what happens to the woman at the well. Now that she has encountered Jesus, she has had the Messiah revealed to her. What kind of effect does this have on her life? And what is going to happen now that she has encountered Jesus? And I think it's going to be pretty instructional for us. So I look forward to connecting with you tomorrow as we come back. Hopefully you've been encouraged today. What are you encouraged by today? Well, one, hopefully you're encouraged by the fact that he called this woman out, that she'd had 5 husbands and the one that she was with right now wasn't even her husband. And yet he openly welcomed her into the conversation and also into salvation. Salvation isn't based on where you've been, what your story is. Jesus is bigger and better than that. Salvation is bigger. His mercy and his grace is bigger and better than all of that. And then we want to worship God in spirit and in truth and recognize that Jesus is the Messiah. God bless you. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.